Okay, welcome everyone to Building Relationships and Engagement in the Virtual Classroom. I am your host, Joshua Britton, and joining me today is Beth and Ria. They're actually leading this session. I just want to go over a couple things first. Just to let everyone know, there will be a hard stop at 2 p.m. I will give a 10-minute warning at 1:50. If you could, please ask your questions down in the chat, and they'll be addressed throughout this session. There will also be some opportunities to unmute yourselves to ask questions via voice. That's all I have. Over to you. I might have just remuted you. I apologize.
Hi guys, good morning or afternoon, sorry. How are you guys? We wanted to welcome you to our session. We're going to go ahead and just share our screen. We don't have anything fancy or flashy. It's pretty straightforward. But we wanted to talk a little bit about what we have found to be really successful in the last few weeks with building relationships and engagement in a virtual classroom. So the plan today is to talk a little bit about the atmosphere of your virtual classroom, to talk about some lesson planning, to establish culture, and to talk about one of the biggest things, which is don't underestimate the value of practice in our classrooms. So a little bit about myself. My name is Beth. Like most of you, I've spent quite a few weeks teaching from home. In my situation, home came with a package of a 7- and 4-year-old. I was the primary caregiver while this was happening. My husband was home from work for a few weeks. And I was also the e-learning administrator for my children, which are two very curious and rambunctious boys. And I did this while teaching pretty much live in my front room. As an educator, I am a firm believer that the foundation of every room is the relationships and the conversations that we have with students. And I think a lot of that happens in those moments in between our actual lesson objectives. I'm a 7-year vet of the Excel Center Kokomo, and I teach the humanities worlds.
Hey guys, so I'm Ria, and I'm also from the Kokomo Excel Center. I've been here for 5 years. I'm both the science teacher and the lead teacher. My situation at home was very different. My children are grown. They both live with me, but they're both adults. And so my cats and dogs interrupted, but other than that, I didn't have family interruptions or a lot of that to manage. My classroom focus, both in the virtual world and in the classroom, is always about fostering having fun and being curious about learning. Go ahead and click. Okay, so we're going to start off talking about atmosphere. So the atmosphere in the virtual classroom needs to be a reflection of the atmosphere you enjoy creating in your real classroom. So some of the things you want to consider is, what's the view behind you? We actually went to different spots deciding on what view we wanted behind us today. The students will see visual distractions behind you, family members passing through, visually cluttered backgrounds, things like that. It's not that that's not okay. That is absolutely okay. One of the things we want to do with those visual distractions is acknowledge they're happening for us as well as acknowledge they're happening for the students, and just not be upset when they happen. Just let them go, let them continue. We're going to show you the backgrounds that both of us had while we were teaching in the virtual realm. One of the staff members from our site had an interesting take on her background. So I want to share that before I show ours. Our CCR did not have this like super visually stimulating background or anything like that. It was kind of just a plain wall. She was sitting at a table in her house, except like there was a picture on the wall and we're like, oh, that's a nice picture. Okay, well the next time it was a different picture. Like, did that change? And then the next time was an octopus. And then finally, it was this broom with googly eyes and a mustache. So this one little piece of her background changed over and over again, and it became a game to find out what that was all about. And that atmosphere she created was low key, but really, really fun. So it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be Pinterest. It just has to be something that reflects you and your personality. Oops, spacebar. I missed the spacebar.
So this is actually my setup. So the first thing I can say is don't overthink this. I have 2 small children, like you guys said, so I knew I needed to be in a corner where you could not see maybe the chaos that was happening in front of me, which was frequent. So this is a corner in my front room. We normally had a rocking chair there, right? I just kind of rearranged. The picture on the left was the very first day. As you can kind of see on the right, it evolved. I did keep the mirror there. I ordered a cork board. One of the most significant moments for me last term as we were virtually teaching, so term 5 for those of us in Indiana, was I had a student, I'd had her before. She was a term 5 graduate. I teach composition, so she was wrapping up some final requirements, and she was really excited to come to my room. And of course, you know, here we are, we're at home. And the very first day, she's like, I just want to be in your room because it's you. And like, she went on, and it really kind of got me in the feels, because I wanted my students to still maintain that type of connection with my classroom. So I created this space. As you guys may or may not notice, I have windows on both sides of that corner. So that really allowed for some good light. And then I drug a floor lamp in from our, it was in our family room at that point. And then I drug in the guest bedroom's lamp. I can always stress to think about your lighting. If your face is dark, your students are going to have a harder time seeing you. So the picture on the right, that's my 4-year-old. He may or may not be wearing a lot of clothing in that picture, because that was one of my constant distractions, right? And he wanted to be like mommy. But I used that picture to show you kind of an example of how I lit my face, so that when we were in that online classroom, they could still see my face. That's really important for our students, even though we may not be feeling our finest or our most professional, or we're wearing our flannel cat PJs on the bottom half. Them seeing your face, in my experience, had significant buy-in for the engagement of my overall classroom.
Okay, and now I'm going to show you mine. So I was in the back room of my house. In the first picture, the one there on the left, that is without my light on that I set up behind my monitor. So again, it's just a little darker. My eyes look a little darker and things like that. And on the right, I've got my light turned on. So the features are better defined. And here's a little word to the wise too. Lighting front fills in some of your little wrinkles, your little shadows, and you look a little younger. There's 2. I mean, some of you look a little younger, but I'm in my 40s. I'm all about looking a little younger. The other thing I want to point out while I've got these images up is one of those images looks more engaged than the other. Why? So does anybody want to put in the chat room why they think one picture looks more engaged than the other?
I don't know if I can see the chat.
Can we see the chat?
I don't know if we can see the chat right now.
You might have to mouse down at the bottom of the screen and click on the panel for chat.
You got the pictures.
I've got the pictures over. Hold on. We got to move you guys. We got to move you. You see it, Rhea? Sorry, guys. We really know how to work this, I promise. There it is. It's right there. Yours is set up different than mine is set up kind of weird right now. You like the smile?
The smile, looking at the camera. So Eric and Donna, ding, 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 ding. Yeah. One of the biggest things we tend to do when we're in our virtual classrooms is we want to look directly at our students' faces. And most of the time, when you're answering the student directly and things like that, that's really what you want to do. But when you're addressing like the group and you're saying things all at once, when you're looking right at the camera, they see your eyes looking right at them, just like they would in the classroom. So looking directly at the camera makes a big difference in how you look engaged. And if you don't look engaged, it's going to be hard to engage them.
So we want to talk about interruptions. I know, again, most of us have been at home, and for most of us, we live with other people. So interruptions are inevitable. And I think even if you are in a situation where your children are grown and know to stay out of the area, or to those of us who have smaller kids at home who have no concept of boundaries, you're going to have an interruption. One of the interruptions I actually had was in the process of upgrading our internet. Remember that story? Because we needed faster speed internet while both my husband and I worked at home. AT&T somehow shut our internet off for 3 days. And they had to send somebody into our house to fix it. That was a massive interruption. So one of the most successful things I have found with that is to just show grace and to roll with it, right? And that's hard for those of us who are teachers who tend to like to control every component of where we're at. So what we have really found, I have really found, is control what you can control and let the small stuff go. You can control where you work. You can control where that is in your house, or if you go to, at one point I came into the building when nobody else was here because I knew I could have some quiet, and try to reduce the background noise. The story there is, I live in front of a park and I really like to go outside, especially in the early part of the day. There's trees in the background. It looks so peaceful and serene. The problem is that I have a bird in my neighborhood that the minute I start talking decides that it's going to talk to me. And actually, Rhea and I were on a FaceTime the other day working on this presentation, and all you could hear was 2 words of mine, and then the house friend would just like, I can control that, right? So looking at what we can control. So embrace the interruptions. The picture on the right, you may notice that there's a computer with some bread and a jar of peanut butter. That was my 4-year-old who decided that in the middle of a rather important meeting, he needed a sandwich, and he needed a sandwich now, and there was really going to be no containing the need for a peanut butter sandwich. So at that point, I had 2 choices, right? I could not make the sandwich and have a meltdown, or I could find a workaround. So that was, I muted myself and we step by step talked about where everything was in the kitchen, and he brought me that sandwich, the supplies. That humanizes us. And for our students to see that human side of us, that we are struggling, it develops a connection. When we build those connections and those relationships, our students are far more likely to log into Zoom because they see you as real, and they see you as somebody whose life isn't necessarily completely put together. And for our students, they need to realize that everybody has those struggles, even though they look different. So it seems silly, but making a peanut butter sandwich was a good connection point to say, look, my life is just the same, just in a slightly different, setting.
The other aspect about the interruptions humanizing us, but it also gives us an opportunity. In our classroom, we get often interrupted less. We get interrupted by our students. We maybe get interrupted by a coach stopping in our classroom, our director. But for the most part, most days, we have our plan, we proceed our plan. Our plans can go awry, but we're not dealing with children having a meltdown or having to start a child's Zoom or having to answer a question from a family member. So it gives us this opportunity to model handling interruptions without creating anxiety, without creating drama around us. And that's just one of those opportunities to take that important life skill that they're going to need in the workplace, that they're going to need with their family and things like that. So just any opportunity we have to model, we always do it, right? So this was kind of a unique one. Hey, and the big one for how you're going to start engaging your students is not changing your personality. You don't have to be the exact same person you are with your friends, but you shouldn't be a completely different person either. These are adults we're dealing with. So this is always advice I give inside my classroom and in the virtual world. You have to let your personality come through, and so that you can start connecting and they can start connecting with you. I'll let you talk about engagement and retention.
So I often think that, as I've said many times, right, those relationships are what are going to connect us to our students. As many of us know who have taught in the virtual world, engagement and retention was a struggle this term. And as a teacher, it was incredibly discouraging. And I had one class, you guys. I had 2 classes that were really strong, but I had one class where I sat by myself in a Zoom room almost every time I logged in. Like, it was such a defeating feeling. And in that particular situation, it was just a group of students, and we all know we have those classrooms that don't always successfully connect the way you want to. but having, again, that personal relationship where you hear in your student's voice what's going on, and you're able to comfortably, even if it's a private message or a text after class, hey, Sam, you sounded really disappointed about your job that didn't happen, and I've noticed you haven't done any lessons. What can we do? It's the idea, though, that they know if that's your authentic self, they get it, right? They know when we're true, and they know when we're not to ourselves. So bringing that personality in helps you build those relationships straight out of the gate before we are even trying to get into the heavy lifting of, week 4 in a term where everybody has stopped doing anything. So again, just talking about being your true authentic self, because you will definitely be able to bring those students farther, because they're going to feel that they have that connection to you. And I haven't been able to see the chat box right now. Does anybody have any questions or anything to add? Feel free to unmute yourself if you feel like you've had an experience that really was key to developing your online relationships with your students. Okay, we're pretty quiet. Okay, I'll minimize the chat again. All right.
Okay, so lesson planning, we're not talking about like, oh, this is how you build a lesson plan because you're professional teachers, you know how to build a lesson plan. Adapting a lesson plan for the virtual environment means narrowing your focus. So what I did every single day was, oh, today I'm teaching genetics. Well, that's enormous. So it was, what is the most important thing my students have to leave today knowing how to do to finish their lessons? So it was, today we're talking about Punnett squares. And normally in the classroom, I wouldn't do that as narrow of a focus. Punnett squares might be the big thing, but there'd be all these other little things. But in the virtual, it was, okay, yeah, I've got to make sure you guys know how to do Punnett squares. Otherwise, you can't get through lessons 10 and 11, and you can't do the project. The other thing I would do for my lesson planning would be, okay, we're talking about this project today, even if not everybody was there yet. Okay, we're going to talk about the project about using Punnett squares, or we're going to talk about what my expectations are on how to do the forces project or whatever. And everything we would talk about that day would be centered on that one project. I'll be adjusting that just a little bit coming into term 1. So term 5, Indiana used Odysseyware, which has built-in lessons. So they had things they could read, they had videos they could watch, questions they had to answer, and then quizzes they had to take and projects. So it was designed to kind of teach them along the way. So what I needed to do was to focus in on the hardest part. And this term coming into term 1, it's going to be more built by me. It's going to be me putting in my PowerPoints and things like that, and using some of the stuff I learned in my first session today from the science teacher at Washington, D.C., so I'm excited about that. So I'm going to have to be a little bit more broader, but now that I know how to be narrow, it's always easier to expand than it is to narrow down. Less is more when it comes to lesson planning in the virtual world. Their attention spans are short anyway, and they get even shorter on Zoom. And the last thing on this, a big plug is record your lessons. When the students went virtual, having students that had something that suddenly happened that they had to take care of. That happens anyway in the classroom, but it happened even more when we went virtual. So being able to say, hey, this is posted here, go click the link and watch what we did, and trying to keep those lessons down to like 20 minutes really helped. And it helped to bring them back. They didn't feel like they had missed out on as much or has fallen as far behind. We all know to use visual aids. I had planned on showing you how to use an iPad to draw. If you haven't seen it yet, I left my iPad in my classroom or in my office. But when you go to share your screen in Zoom, there's an option to do an iPhone or iPad. And so I would do that. So it was like I was at my classroom board drawing. but I was just drawing on my iPad. So they got a very similar experience to in the classroom by utilizing a drawing tool. And that, for science especially, really, really helpful for keeping them engaged and getting them practicing the things they needed to practice.
I actually want to circle back real quick too. When we're talking about recording lessons and the importance of lesson planning, we all know this, we're all diverse. We all approach things differently. Everybody records lessons a little bit in their own way. So one of the things that worked really, so Ria would just record her Zoom and she'd pause it as needed, and she has her own private YouTube channel she would upload to, and she'd share the links with the students. I tend to function more in the Google Classroom side of life. So for me, when I was lesson planning, frequently what that meant is after my kids went to bed at night, I would sit down with my computer and I use a Chrome extension called Screencastify. I don't know if anybody has used that. I highly recommend it, especially if you're using Classroom. And I would make, I think videos for 5 minutes are free, and then you have, currently right now, I think it's $30 for the year to do it, unlimited recording time. But I would record a lesson and I would be able to upload it into my Google Classroom instantly. I'd be able to label it and I would be able to get that to my students. And that was just part of my lesson planning process. And what's great about that, I prefer shorter videos because I look at the attention span. And if I was a student who missed a day, I don't want to watch a 45-minute video, but 5 minutes might help engage me a little more to get me that motivation push. That's motivating push, I suppose, sorry. That will help me move on as we go. Why are we not moving, Ria?
Get it down over the thing.
Okay, sorry guys. We really know how to work on this, I promise. We want to talk about advertising the next lesson as well. Establish the value in the next lesson before your students leave for the day. Think of it like a cliffhanger. So, you know, whenever you watch your favorite TV show, I love Outlander. That's not a surprise to my staff. And like, you know, or it's a season finale where you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I have to watch it. Because again, it's little tricks and tips that keep those students kind of dialed in. Highlight what is going to be challenging. So like I said, I teach composition. So in Indiana, that looks like 2 major essays that are the required essays for graduation. That really stresses students out, especially when they're that term's graduate, right? They're a term 5 grad and they're in term 5. So for me, it was, I had a calendar that I posted every day in our classroom, like just, you know, shot it up there. And I was like, okay, we are here. Here's what is to do next. So projects or quizzes, but really helping establish that sense of urgency for our students is going to get us quite a bit farther in that point. Talk about what is remaining to accomplish. Talk about what you do have left in the term so that you aren't feeling like you're just kind of stringing them along. Let them know that there's a goal. I think that's really important.
I'm going to go ahead and address the question in the chat. If you have your iPhone or anything like access to iMovie is a decent editing tool. Movie Maker is another one that I use for some editing. And mostly I just cut down any intro stuff because Zoom starts recording as soon as you pop up. That is all I used for my recording in term 5. I will probably explore a little more Screencastify. Previously to term 5, I have an entire library of recorded lessons for all of my classes for when I needed substitutes. So I could just email here. This is, I would use a program called Doceri, D-O-C-E-R-I, because it had a free version. And I could then write directly onto my PowerPoints using an iPad. And so I do that while I was teaching in my classroom, or I'd do it separately if I needed to be gone. And then I could send that to my sub along with then any work. So previously to term 5, I had done, you know, like a decade worth of videoing of my lessons. And so I really find it to be a powerful tool for when students miss class and for when you miss class. And that could be a huge reality for us this coming school year, is us missing class. And simply because, say I get a low-grade fever, I'm going to have to go get tested for COVID-19 and I can't come to work until I have a negative test back. well, maybe I don't feel terrible, so I can still make some videos and post them. I can still help out a sub to keep my class moving. In the chat, Donna says she likes Edpuzzle. I've not used that one, but I've heard really good things about them. It also, Donna, does Edpuzzle tell you who watched it or just a number of watches?
Yes, with Edpuzzle, it's an assignment, so you can post questions,
Okay.
things inside. Even if you just post one question at the end, they can't skip through. They have to watch the whole video to get to the question at the end. So it grades that they watched it and that they answered the question correctly.
Which is lovely.
That is lovely, yes. Google Hangouts can be linked directly to Google Classroom as well. I think they're calling it Google Meets now instead. Edpuzzle, I believe, is free. Or has a free version, but I'm not 100% on that.
It has a free version and a paid version. The problem with the free version is it only gives you 20 videos and then
Okay.
it's done. And so the paid one is really nice.
Can you recycle your videos, Donna? Or are they a one-time use for those 20?
They're saved in your content, so you can save them. But if you want more than 20, you have to delete before you can make another.
Ooh, math quizzes. We were just talking about math quizzes.
Math quizzes, we are looking at Edulastic. We're using those or Google Forms. Edulastic is a little more friendly towards things like exponents and some of the math symbols, whereas Google Forms is a little less friendly. It's a little harder to find those appropriate symbols. And then Edulastic does link into Google Classroom.
These are all really good. What I love about these is we learn just as much as anybody else. So
No, I have not seen QThink for math as an interactive. Oh, I need to minimize the chat.
yeah, it gets in the way.
Okay. The other thing that I did to increase engagement with my students is I always started my Zoom 5 minutes before class began. And so as soon as they showed up, I was starting conversations. Maybe we commiserate about things that suck about the pandemic and how badly we want Mexican food, whatever it is.
Tiger King, that was big in my world. Tiger King.
We didn't talk much about Tiger
Oh,
King.
Tiger King was huge.
You had different students than I did. We got obsessed with ball caps for some reason. We had a student who wore a different ball cap every class. So at the beginning of class, he was always there 5 minutes early. We had to have a conversation about what hat he was wearing that day. But also, of course, like any technical difficulties, and you can double check you have everything you need for it. Like the normal things you would do starting class 5 minutes early. But the greeting the students and having those short conversations is so key to building that relationship, and they're more likely to keep coming back to you. Is there anything you want to add?
I think we're good.
And this one sounds counterintuitive, but start your lesson 5 minutes late. It gives you time to take attendance, of course. You're not pressuring yourself, but it allows them to continue to participate. Donna, my Zoom lessons were usually about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the topic. Or I would edit them down to 20 or 30 minutes and edit out the side conversations about ball caps. And at one point, we somehow got on Bill Gates.
So, and I know Ria's going to read a chat question here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
We want to talk about the touch base with students. Starting that 5 minutes late, we still establish, I think Ria and I did this very similarly, is we still established that expectation that you were in class on time. But it was really, that was really valuable, especially I thought, to be able to touch base with our students, because this is a really difficult, extremely difficult time for them. They're missing those emotional relationships just as much as we are. And unfortunately for our students, they tend to have a lot more chaos or unexpected circumstances that really throw them into tailspins. So really touching base in that 5 minutes about how they're doing. We talked about commiserating. So one thing my classroom did, especially the first day, we did it twice, is we came up with quarantine names, and I can't take credit for this. I saw this. There is a secondary ELA page on Facebook. For those of you who are ELA teachers, I really recommend it. But their quarantine name was how you were feeling and the last thing you ate. So, you know, it could have been anxious taco, or I was...
You should put in the chat box your quarantine
yes,
name.
your quarantine name. What would be your quarantine name? So it was really fun. So we found out a lot of things about people, like what we can, sorry, I was reading Josh's comment. I just lost, but we can, like, who likes what? So I was on a Taki kick for a while. I don't know why Takis became my thing, probably because I work with young people who bring them to my classroom. So I was like over caffeinated Taki, I think was what mine was. But here's the other thing. This is really it gave me, or will continue to give me, a touch point for where their emotional and mental health is. And again, especially in the pandemic, right? I don't think we can do that enough with our students, is to create those touch bases and to create that space, again, for those text conversations afterwards. Or I would set a reminder. We are loving your name.
Lazy SpaghettiOs is my favorite so far.
That might be my new favorite. Tired lemonade, I feel too. But again, right, I set reminders on my phone. Hey, check with Mariah in 3 days. I'm really concerned about this response, right? 'Cause again, some of our students we will know, some we don't. But that 5 minute, extra 5 minutes built in really, really, really established important touch points. And then we would do other stupid things. I think it might even be in the silly things. That's a bad word. I need to remove it from my vocabulary.
Or your kids will say it.
They will. But it was just silly things, and it might be in a slide later, but like we had a bring your pet to class day one day. We had cats, dogs, guinea pigs, ferrets. My son brought our betta fish to class with us. I think we had something else odd. But that's just that bonding, right? Because in the classroom, we are going to stop and have those aside conversations. Most of us, right, are going to be having those silly moments with our students that creates that bond, right? So that extra 5 minutes is a huge buy-in in my book. We have to let go of maybe that like rigidity that we feel we have to be filling every moment jam-packed with instruction. Also, I want to go back to a chat question.
Which one are you addressing?
It was, can we embed Zoom into Google Classroom? So I will be the first to tell you I am not a fan of my recorded Zoom lessons, but because of how they are saved on the computer, I would imagine you could. They save them as an MP4.
I can address it.
Yep, so Ms. Ria can.
Yeah, because the Zoom saves as an MP4, I used YouTube as my device to be able to embed easily. So I uploaded to YouTube, giving me a quick shareable link. I could make that video unlisted. That way I didn't have to worry about legal issues and things like that, or weird people showing up and watching and commenting on my video. And then I would just send out a link. So only somebody with the link could view the video. And then that link will embed into PowerPoints, will embed into Google Classroom and things like that. So yes, that you absolutely can. And I really, really need to know that somebody ate a lizard. It says Winta is a lazy lizard, and so did she really eat a lizard? Because that's awesome. There was another question.
There was another question. We may have missed it with all of the fun nicknames.
So the question was about whether or not you had live Zooms interfere with each other.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
Unless you're talking super, super loud, they shouldn't. We definitely used personal IDs with passwords to make sure we didn't have any form of overlap.
I mean, and my overlap was with my own personal children in their e-learning, which let me tell you, for those of you who may have experienced this, first graders on a Zoom lesson are quite an experience to be had. I have never been more entertained than watching 20 first graders try to work Zoom. So for me, that was my experience. I got to be a little hectic, but I never had any like cross interference. I don't know if that answers your question, my friend. I'm sorry. Yeah, we have like 86 things going on here, guys. Sorry.
Okay. Now we'll talk about establishing culture. And again, we're going to pull up the chat. What's your favorite thing to do to establish culture in your classroom? And how might you adapt that to online? Oh, the Ivy's question was whether or not they had the same teacher for a class. We aren't allowing overlap, or we didn't. Our classes happened at specifically scheduled times, so students could never be scheduled to be in 2 different Zooms at the same time.
Oh, and Christy, your quarantine name is How You're Feeling and the Last Thing You Ate. So mine would, technically I had salad for lunch, so
Yeah.
I feel like excited salad, I guess, which no connection.
Okay, so so our new question to you is, what's your favorite thing to do to establish culture in your classroom, and how might you adapt that to your online virtual environment? They're still in quarantine names. I love it.
They're great. They're so much fun.
They're fun.
It's one of my favorite things.
Such a neat culture thing.
Be yourself, yes.
And the flexibility is huge. And we have to be flexible most of the time anyway in our environment with students who have children and things like that. Ivy says, I try to use social media tools and emojis.
Yeah, I like memes. Yeah, Carol says music. Yeah, I use a lot of music, and music was a little bit more difficult, I felt, to infuse into my Zoom classroom, just because there was sometimes so much kind of going on. At the time, I'd forget to hit play, and I'd make a great playlist and never get to it.
I had a college teacher that did that. The music always related to what we were going to talk to. Sometimes it was a really loose relationship, but it was okay.
It's a little tough sometimes. I think what's important, and it's, I feel like we keep saying it, is just to create those relationships and engage. And we all know as teachers, that's the best thing we can do. So whatever works for you in the classroom, my biggest piece of advice is to bring that into that virtual world, even if you don't feel that you're tech savvy. It doesn't have to be complicated. One of the things I actually did was I have younger kids at home, and they had wanted to watch Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle.
I like the mailing notes.
Oh, I made some notes. It was fun. And so what I did is I went and used just some Photoshop, and I just put like e-learning, Welcome to the Jungle, and I put my face all over each of the 4 actors. And it was silly, but I do that weird stuff in my room anyway. So they appreciated that moment, right? And Carol said she mails notes. I mailed some notes. I wanted to mail more, but then I got really busy. But that was a very low-tech way, I agree, right, to create those connections. It doesn't have to be big or fancy.
It's about being inviting, right? And so by being inviting, being your normal self on Zoom right away, you start that same, I love Crazy Hair Day. It's one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now more than ever, it's important to stay positive as we can. Each of us have had different challenges with quarantines, and whether it be financial or stress of family members or children being home, things like that. But the students need us to relate to them, and they need that positive connection. We also armed ourselves with resource lists. So if a student said anything about being worried about something, we had a resource list at our disposal, whether it be mental health aid or food pantries, things like that. And we got them to them as quickly as possible, just to show that we were really, really there to support them. Then building time into your virtual classroom or your hybrid classroom, which is what we are doing in term 1. So we will have some students in our classroom, but in many of our classrooms that may be 6, 8 students, and the rest of the students in our class will be logging in via Zoom. And so one of the things that compares to for me is when I've taught distance learning classes, I would turn the camera around and be like, okay, everybody from Kokomo, say hi to everybody from Shelbyville. Or I would constantly identify where people were or who was saying things, and they get laughing at each other and things like that. The virtual kids are not just there to listen. They need to interact with the classroom. And again, a lot of that can, for if you're worried about legal issues with recording, you can edit some of that out. We had internally this, what our director called the one doc to rule them all.
This is going back to Kim's question in the chat, by the way, guys.
Yes, Kim asked in the chat, can you repeat where you listed the resource list? We don't have it in this presentation. This was provided to us by our lead coach and our director, and they just put together everything for Howard County, our county to the north where we have a lot of students attend from, Miami County, and so a couple of neighboring counties, so that as soon as we could identify an issue, as teachers, we had the power to get the information to them. So designating someone in your building to start building a resource list that you have at your fingertips, you have open and ready to go, is a powerful thing.
And to that point,
Oh, I love sports.
sports, yes. I want to talk a little bit about, like, with those relationships, by no means do we want to overstep or undermine either way the relationship our students have with our coaches. So I know for myself, like, I work very closely, especially with a couple of the coaches, where I was like, hey, I'm sending this resource, but I really, really, really need you to text Pete tomorrow because I think he has a food shortage and he wasn't responsive. So again, I think it's also making sure that we can hand those relationships off to the people in the staff that already have relationships, or that's part of their role, but also we have to talk about, even though relationships are important, our staff relationships are really important, and not putting ourselves in a situation to burn out with some of the emotional lifting I felt like I did a lot of times in those virtual classrooms. So we didn't make a slide, but I think when we talk about the power of relationships, that interconnectivity of your staff relationship also goes very far, and students see that connection. It really also helps build those relationships because they know it's a cohesive unit looking out for them.
Hey there. There's about 10 minutes left.
Thank you, Joshua. Yes, they were Jenny. And I think one thing we talked about is also encouraging and or sometimes forcing, which is maybe not quite the right word, our students to talk. I would purposely unmute them, and I sometimes would bribe them to turn their cameras on because I wanted to see their faces, but I wanted them to see each other. But it's easy in that virtual world to let those students who already kind of tend to hang back in the classroom really hang back. So really engaging with that seemed to be really key, because it did actually, they felt a part of the room, and therefore you created that relationship on a deeper level.
We did not force our students.
Yeah, force is a hesitant word.
Yeah, no, I mean, she said bribe. She said it very appropriately. I just wanted to make that clear. We never forced our students to turn on their cameras because we know we do have some students that might have some things show up in the background, or they're afraid that somebody might say they've got a dirty home or something like that. And yes, that little bit of social work background I've got that my mother instilled in me really wants to know because I really want to help. But at that point in time, I needed that relationship more than I needed to report them.
Never underestimate the power of hello. I think taking a point to stop and acknowledge every student as they walked in, I guess, well, virtually walked in, but stop and say hello. If our students walk in late to our room, even though they might get the look, we're still going to greet them, right? We're going to make sure they know that they are a welcome and important part of our community. And don't say hi the same way every time. Now, I did one, we had a Tiger King, and I can't remember what we were saying. That was a joke. Like I said, my one class was really hung up on Tiger King for a while. And, oh, hello, all you cats and kittens. Yes. So I greeted them like that every day the same way, but give them a variety, because it establishes that we care about them and we see them as individuals, not this room that is all one big unit. Students need that, again, now more than ever. So what you would do, like I said, I see somebody talks about what they see in the hallway, but yes, they need that moment.
Yeah, stopping and talking in the hallway. And of course, in term 5 in Indiana, we didn't have hallways. So I would do things like, if they mentioned something in a class, I'd jot it down and then make sure to ask about it in the next class. Oh, did your truck get fixed? Or how's your father doing? Things like that. How's your daughter handling her online classes? So I always tried to remember little things, and I'm not good at that, so I wrote them down.
So dialogue, not monologue. Most of us have probably, well, I don't know, I guess some of you younger people may have not seen Ferris Bueller. But, you think about Ben Stein and his very monotone, like Bueller. You want to be aware that when you're talking, and I think because you're not in your room, your energy level is easy to let decline. You don't want to decline your energy level. You want to bring that same like power of who you are as an educator to your classroom. Be careful you're not being monotone. And Rhea will self-admit that she did this in her very first video ever.
So this would be about 13 years ago now. I was teaching at Ivy Tech and I had to miss a class. And we didn't really have subs for adjuncts hardly at all at my little campus. So I made a video, no problem. But because I didn't have actual people in front of me, I just started reading my slides and I'd kind of say some extra things. And I started being like, don't fall into the trap of letting your voice and your face sound uninterested. Like I got really, really bad. And I just posted it. I was in a hurry. I was anxious. And then my students, fortunately, I had a relationship with my students. We were about halfway through the class. And one of them goes, I'm sorry, Miss Rhea, I couldn't do it. I couldn't watch it. It was so boring. You sounded terrible. I'm like, oh God. And then I finally went back and listened to it. It was bad. It was so bad. So then what I started doing was I kind of practiced, and we're going to get to the, practice is important, but I would set up like pictures to give me people to talk to at first until I could really kind of imagine them in front of me. And I'd use my hands talking, and I'd kind of, I'm going to pretend that's Mabel, and I'm going to pretend that's Tammy. And I'd do that until I sounded more myself. And that gestures, I gesture all the time when I'm speaking. I get huge sometimes. You've probably seen it the whole time we've been doing this. So I just do that. I still do it in all my videos. I bring my hands up higher if I'm cut off at the shoulders, because my students know to expect it from me, and it keeps me from being super boring.
And we've talked about this, the practice makes perfect, right? Especially like for myself, when I make Screencastify, I tend to watch them 3 times over, but watch for your ticks or pauses, the ums, the uhs, the whatever, and I still do them, but practice makes perfect, and be willing to watch yourself no matter how uncomfortable that makes you, because it makes me really, really uncomfortable. But I think that was really important too, to kind of see what that looks like for our students.
Okay, so at this point, we're gonna kind of scan back through the chat, look for any questions that we might have missed. Valencia has 95% ELL students. It's difficult to engage them in conversation. The language barrier, I can get past it usually a little bit by really trying to ask them questions about their culture. So I kind of target in and have them maybe teach me a few words or something like that to start building that relationship. I had one student talk to me for a while about tamales, and I'm not sure, because of her accent, I understood all of it, but it didn't matter. She was excited to talk to me. But that's always going to be a challenge. And if you have a coach that works with that student, you can ask them to attend your Zoom to help you, and they can send you private chats to help you translate a little bit.
And then also, and the last question I saw was, can you reach them via recorded lessons? I would say, Christy, you absolutely can. And again, it depends on which platform you choose to use. If you're in a situation where you can use Google Classroom, for me, again, that's been most successful, but I know YouTube is accessible to pretty much everybody. So again, yeah, you can completely upload them to TeacherTube or YouTube, right? And so yeah, that's been, and in my classroom, frankly, I had 2 students. It was a 9 a.m. class, and God love teenagers. That morning was really, they just couldn't wake up. So they almost always watched recorded lessons. I didn't love it, but you know what? You roll with it, and someday I will have teenagers who don't wake up at 6 a.m. every day, and I'll understand a little better. But I met them where they're at, because if I don't, then I'm not giving them that access to education, right?
If my video ran a little longer, I would give timestamps. So I'd send the link to the video, and in the timestamps, it'd be like, okay, at this time we talked about Punnett squares. At this time we talked about inheritance patterns and things like that. And that could help them jump around the video a little bit. And so if they were watching it later, the timestamps on longer videos do help.
Anyway, I think that's what we're time for. We're really excited you guys joined us. This is something both of us are very, very passionate about. If we had more time, we could look at data and talk about how retention, right, in those, retention was definitely higher in most of our classes. So, like I said, I would really just thanks. And I know Ria's going to grab one question, and then I think we're done.
Adding the timestamps is it's something you do in the description after the video is uploaded. So it takes a little bit longer. You have to wait for the video to upload, and then you kind of go through and you're like at this and you link to a time. There are all kinds of YouTube tutorials on how to add timestamps to your descriptions. I can send you one later, Valencia.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. We're so excited to see you virtually. And have a great day. Thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.